Now come to Prime Minister's questions. Dr. Neil Hudson.
Question number one, Mr. Speaker.
Brilliant. Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know the whole House will be appalled by the death of a young boy in Sheffield on Monday. Our hearts go out to his family and his loved ones. Knife crime blights our communities, and we redouble every step to ensure that young people are kept safe. Mr. Speaker, on Monday, I met other European leaders in Brussels to discuss vitally important focus on security and defence in a volatile world. I'm determined to reduce barriers to trade, making it easier for businesses to do business, and ensuring a better relationship with our European partners delivers for the British people. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others in addition to my duties in this House. I shall have further such meetings later today.
Dr. Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sadly, suicide is the biggest killer of young people under 35. Andy Airy, Tim Owen and Mike Palmer are the three dads walking. They each tragically lost their precious daughters, Sophie, Emily and Beth, to suicide. And they have campaigned tirelessly for suicide prevention to be included in the school curriculum in an age-appropriate way. We met with the previous Prime Minister in Downing Street, and suicide prevention was added to the RSHE curriculum guidance for consultation last year. I know the Prime Minister has met the three dads and supports their campaign, but sadly progress has stalled. Please, would the Prime Minister meet with me and the three dads so that we can finally get this over the line and ultimately save young lives?
Minister.
Well, can I thank him for steadfastly raising this really important issue, particularly during Children's Mental Health Week. I have met the three dads walking. They're inspirational, their courage is extraordinary, and as the father of young children, I don't know how they're able to campaign in the way that they do. I'm not sure I would be able to do so. So, of course, I can assure him that I will meet them again and push this agenda, really important agenda, forward.
Yasmin Qureshi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 86% of trains at Kersley Station in my constituency were delayed or cancelled in the past 12 weeks, and this is widespread throughout the Bolton South and Walkden. My constituent Sophie, who commutes from Walkden to Manchester, recently told me almost every day at least one peak time train is cancelled, and when the train finally turns up, it's overcrowded. Recently, she was stranded for hours after constant cancellations because the train crews were unavailable. Can the Prime Minister ensure my constituents that this government is committed to building reliable railways after 14 years of Tory chaos?
Yeah.
Well, my honourable friend is right to highlight that the party opposite left our railways in a terrible state. 2 years of strikes costing our economy £850 million in lost revenue. You can't grow the economy if you can't run the railways. We will launch Great British Railways to focus relentlessly on passengers and to clamp down on delays and cancellations. And I'm pleased, Mr. Speaker, that Northern have announced the largest ever investment in its fleet to deliver 450 new trains, meaning more comfortable, reliable journeys for her constituents.
Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Badenoch.
Mr. Speaker, when Labour negotiates, our country loses. Yesterday, we heard the government offered £18 billion for Mauritius to take our territory in the Chagos Islands. This is money that belongs to our children and their children. This is an immoral surrender, so North London lawyers can boast at their dinner parties. Mr. Speaker, when Labour negotiates, we all lose. Sometimes they don't even bother. Why did the Energy Secretary withdraw government lawyers from defending the case against the eco-nutters who want to obstruct Rosebank's oil and gas fields?
Mr. Speaker, let me deal with the serious issue she raises in relation to the Chagos case. This is a military base that is vital to our national security and to national security. A number of years ago, the legal certainty of that base was thrown into doubt. And let me, Mr. Speaker, let me be clear, and I'll pick my words carefully. Without legal certainty, the base cannot operate in practical terms as it should. That is bad for our national security, and it's a gift to our adversaries. Now, some within the party opposite know exactly what I'm talking about. That is why, Mr. Speaker, that is why the last government started negotiations about sovereignty and about securing the long-term use of the base. Mr. Speaker, they were right to do so. That's why the last government conducted 11 of the 13 rounds of those negotiations. And, Mr. Speaker, they were right to do so. That is why this government has completed that process, and we were right to do so. Mr. Speaker, I will set out the details when they're finalised, and it will, of course, be presented to Parliament. But if the Leader of the Opposition is properly briefed on the national security implications when she's asking these questions, which she's perfectly entitled to do, then she knows exactly what I'm talking about in terms of national security and legal certainty. If, on the other hand, she's not properly briefed on the national security implications, she's not doing her job, she's not concerned about national security, and she's not fit to be Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, how can anyone believe that this man is defending UK interests when he bends the knee to anyone who asks him? His answer was so weak and so waffly, it is no wonder he needs a voice coach. But he didn't answer the question I asked him, why the Energy Secretary was not defending our country. The Energy and Environment Secretaries received nearly £400,000 worth of donations from Lisbeth Rousing. It's her money behind the court case that will stop an £8 billion investment, threaten thousands of jobs, and endanger energy security for all of us. Did the Energy Secretary refuse to defend UK interests because he's funded by billionaire eco-zealots?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'll come to that very issue, but I noticed she didn't say she was briefed about the Chagos issue. This is important. Mr. Speaker, when she became Leader of the Opposition, I said to her that I would give her a briefing on any national security issue if she asked for it. That's very important to the way that we run our democracy. She has not asked for a briefing on the Chagos case. And that's because she's more interested in chasing reform than in national security. In relation to oil and gas, it'll be part of our energy supply for many years to come. We've been absolutely clear about that. But we are going through a transition. It's important because that transition to renewable energy will give us lower bills, energy security, take Putin's foot off our throat, and it's good for the national interest.
Mr. Speaker, this is a weak answer because he doesn't know what is going on. Last week, I asked about the employment bill. He didn't know what was going on. We asked about the education bill. He didn't know what was going on. Let me tell him what is going on. Maybe he can answer some questions. Shell has said a one-year delay to Rosebank will cost £350 million and the loss of 1,000 jobs. Yep. Equinor has said a two-year delay to Jackdaw will cost £800 million. Yep. The only benefit I can see is the £400,000 to Labour ministers. Yep. At a time of war in Europe, threatened energy security, increased competition from the US and elsewhere, we should be getting British oil and gas out of the ground. Does the Prime Minister have the guts to take on Labour donors and his Energy Secretary and approve the licence applications when they are resubmitted?
Prime Minister.
Speaker, she doesn't even want to know what's going on, otherwise she'd have asked for the relevant briefing. She knows the position on Rosebank. She knows the court case that has meant that the licence has got to be reviewed. There's a process that's got to be gone through in the proper way. She understands that, but yet again she's proving all she can do is student politics and playing party politics.
Mr. Speaker, I am speaking on behalf of the people of this country. When Labour negotiates, our country loses. When Labour negotiates, our country loses. He's talking about bringing growth and investment. Last week, he lost a £450 million investment from AstraZeneca that we negotiated, Mr. Speaker, and which would have delivered growth immediately. That same day, he also lost the £8 billion oil field investment that would have delivered next year. Business is abandoning the North Sea because of his decisions. What signal does he think he is sending to investors?
As she knows, AstraZeneca was a commercial decision. She must understand that. But, Mr. Speaker, all she does is come here every week, carping from the sidelines, talking our country down. We've got the highest investment for 19 years. PwC say the second best place to invest in the world. The IMF has upgraded growth. Wages are up. Inflation is down. There's more to do. Reforming planning and regulation. Building new homes. Supporting a runway, the third runway at Heathrow. What unites these? Championed by Labour, opposed by the Tories.
Mr. Speaker, it's so hard to believe anything he says. This is a man who needed emergency voice coaching on Christmas Eve. This government is so clueless. It is borrowing £8 billion. It is so clueless. It is borrowing £8 billion for GB Energy, a vanity project that is not great, not British, and does not produce any energy. Its own chairman, Mr. Speaker, admitted it will take 20 years to create just 1,000 jobs. Meanwhile, 200,000 jobs are at stake in our oil and gas sector right now. Does he think that 1,000 jobs in 20 years' time are worth more than the 200,000 jobs we have now?
Prime Minister.
Again, she clearly hasn't been briefed or doesn't want to be briefed. GB Energy, a publicly owned energy company that will drive the move to renewables. That is not about the number of jobs in HQ. It's about the thousands upon thousands of jobs they will generate to give us energy security, something we didn't have under the last government, take Putin's boot off our throat, something we didn't have under the last government. They lost control of the economy. We're getting it back.
He can waffle as long as he likes, Mr. Speaker. But we know that Labour promised to bring energy bills down by £300. Instead, bills are going up. He's freezing pensioners while shoveling money to Mauritius. The Prime Minister isn't just managing decline, Mr. Speaker, he is creating decline. He has the power to grant these licenses, open these oil and gas fields, save British jobs, and bring down bills. Why does he find it so hard to do the right thing?
She really needs to look into how these licenses are granted. Well, I appreciate that their reset seems to be having no policies apart from cutting pensions and having no briefings on relevant issues. Let's just remind ourselves, they presided over the biggest drop in living standards on record. Mortgages went through the roof and they left a £22 billion black hole. And we learned last weekend, Mr. Speaker, that under the last government, £35 billion was lost on benefit fraud and error. Who was at the Treasury at the time, you might ask, Mr. Speaker? The Shadow Business Secretary and the Leader of the Opposition. They want to give lectures. No thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member for Clacton says that his party is, and I quote, open to anything when it comes to changing our NHS and open to an insurance-based system. So can my right honourable friend confirm that under a Labour government, the NHS will be there for everyone when they need it, not having to worry about the bill?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the NHS is the lifeblood of our country, and that's why we invested £25 billion at the budget, a record amount, and we're making it fit for the future through our plan for change. What a contrast with Reform, whose leader has said that those who can afford to pay should pay for our healthcare. Under Labour, the NHS will always be free at the point of use for anyone who needs it.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I associate myself with the remarks of the Prime Minister about the terrible murder of the 15-year-old in Sheffield and say that we will support any effective action against knife crime that the government proposes? At his first Prime Minister's questions, I told the Prime Minister about my constituent Andrea. A full-time carer for her mother, Andrea is one of thousands of carers caught up in the carers allowance scandal, hounded by the DWP for repayments. The Prime Minister accepted there was a problem and set up an independent review, and we welcomed that. But 2 months after the announcement of the review, Andrea received a letter summoning her to a tribunal next week. Her mother's health has been deteriorating. She's had to go in a care home. This is the last thing Andrea needs. So will the Prime Minister step in and do the right thing and cancel Andrea's tribunal and all proceedings against carers like Andrea, at least until the review is concluded?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we set up the independent review, and I know he welcomes that and was the right thing to do. I don't know the details of Andrea's case, but I will certainly, if he provides them to me, make sure that we have the details and look into what's happened in her particular case.
Sir Ed Davey.
I'm grateful for that reply. The Secretary of State for DWP wrote to me and wasn't interested in engaging, so I hope the Prime Minister will. Mr. Speaker, turning to foreign policy now, last night many of us were alarmed to hear President Trump speak about forcibly displacing 1.8 million people from Gaza. The Prime Minister has spoken to the President on several occasions now. Does he personally believe that Trump recognises the dangers of statements like this to the fragile ceasefire in Gaza, and indeed to the security of both Palestinians and Israelis? I'm glad that the Foreign Secretary has confirmed that the government's position is still a two-state solution. I think that has support on all sides of the House. But will he reassure the House that this position and our concerns on these dangerous statements from the President will be communicated to the White House directly and firmly?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, you raised a very important issue. The most important issue on the ceasefire is obviously it's sustained. We see it through the phases, and that means that the remaining hostages come out and the aid that's desperately needed gets into Gaza at speed and at the volumes that are needed. I have, from the last few weeks, two images fixed in my mind. The first is the image of Emily Damari reunited with her mother, which I found extremely moving. The second was the image of thousands of Palestinians literally walking through the rubble to try to find their homes and their communities in Gaza. They must be allowed home. They must be allowed to rebuild, and we should be with them in that rebuild on the way to a two-state solution.
Patricia Ferguson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The announcement of a third runway at Heathrow is obviously a massive boost to growth in the economy. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that it is important that the economic boost is spread around the UK? And will he therefore agree to ask the relevant minister to meet with me and other Glasgow MPs and with the Chamber of Commerce to discuss the possibility of a new supply chain hub being created in the city where materials for Heathrow's expansion could be reassembled?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, she's right. The new runway at Heathrow can boost economic growth across the whole of the country. It would boost the economy by billions and create over 100,000 jobs across the UK, with 60% of the economic benefits outside London and the South East. It is, Mr. Speaker, good for Scottish passengers and Scottish businesses, particularly Scottish salmon, which is the #1 export passing through Heathrow, worth £970 million over the last 5 years. I'll obviously happily make sure that she gets a meeting with the relevant minister.
Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I can assure the honourable member for Rugby that Reform want healthcare to be free at the point of delivery. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. There appears to be some panic on that side of the House. I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
To ask the Prime Minister, I'd like some advice, please. What do I say? Oh, they really are panicking, aren't they?
Order. I want to get this question over with. All you're doing is ensuring it goes on forever. Quick question.
To ask the Prime Minister for some advice, what do I say to 25,000 constituents in Clacton, including...
Either get on. No, you've got it. No, we're not both standing at the same. Look, I need a quick question, then I can get you the answer. Come on.
What do I say, Prime Minister, to 25,000 constituents in Clacton, including 99-year-old Jim O'Dwyer, who flew a full set of missions on Lancaster bombers as tail end Charlie, as they're losing their winter fuel allowance, feeling the pinch, whilst at the same time we're prepared to give away a military base and pay £18 billion for the privilege of doing so.
Mr. Speaker, he talks of panic. The only panic is people using the NHS who know that under his policy he wants to charge them for using the NHS. And what he should say to the people of Clacton when he finally finds Clacton is that they should vote Labour because we're stabilising the economy and boosting the Dems.